Welcome to Changing Perspectives, Considerations Surrounding Access and Disability. My name is Antea Lee, and I am the Disability Access Coordinator from Mitchell College in New London, Connecticut. Today we're going to be talking about the different models of disability. And to start off, we're going to first talk about what has been modeled in the past, which has been the medical model of disability. And the medical model of disability is the viewpoint that the disability is the problem that needs to be fixed because an impairment exists in the person. Whether that is in the mind or in the body, that's typically the approach that has been taken towards disability historically. But what else is there? There's also the social model of disability, the viewpoint that disability is inherently created by society because environments and attitudes can exclude persons with various types of impairments. The social model poses that the impairment isn't the problem, the environment is. Quite often, when we think about providing access, we consider disabilities that are visible to us as observers. Examples of visible disabilities include physical disabilities, deafness, and blindness. However, the disabilities that are invisible to us as observers deserve just as much thought towards access. Examples of invisible disabilities include learning disabilities and psychiatric disabilities. However, neither of these lists are exhaustive. So take a moment to imagine. You are a student in a course where you need to read several articles to prepare for your next class discussion. The professor has posted the readings online in the school's learning management system. When you open the first reading, you realize that these readings are going to take you more time than you anticipated, and you still have other homework for another class to complete. The documents have been scanned from original printed material and uploaded as PDFs. You happen to be a student with a print disability, and the document you open is not accessible to use with the assistive technology you utilize. How might you feel? This student is still capable of understanding the information you've provided if they had access to it. The medical model approach would solve this issue with individual accommodations for the student, with the student needing to make special arrangements to receive the information accessibly. This would cause a delay for the student who needs to access the readings for their course and can create more work for the faculty during an already busy semester. But what if there was a better way? The social model would say that the person's impairment is not the problem, but the format of the document is. So what would happen if the student didn't have to make special arrangements to receive the same information as her classmates? What if the information was readily accessible to her? The social model and the concept of universal design allows us to create environments that are physically, instructionally, and attitudinally inclusive. When we foster environments that are inclusive, we ideally eliminate the otherness that is often associated with having a disability. As faculty and staff members who actively work with students, we have an amazing opportunity to be stewards of this type of approach. Ron Mace, the creator of the term universal design, stated that universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. The whole premise of this is that everything is accessible to every person, no matter if they have any type of impairment or not. Taking this concept and applying it to instruction, there are a number of considerations that we can make as we're building out our courses, planning lessons, or choosing which materials to use. These considerations not only help to create ease of access for persons with disabilities, but are also useful to the variety of students we see in our classrooms. These tools are useful for students who are not native English speakers and also allow students with preferred learning styles to learn in a way that suits them best. People who are visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic, and so on. The following slides are going to be a number of suggestions to help get you started. It's by no means an exhaustive list or a full tutorial on how to do each of these things. However, there'll be additional resources that you can access in order to learn about these small things that can make a big impact. One of the important things to consider is the environment. How are you setting up your physical classroom spaces? Is there enough room for someone with a wheelchair or a walker to easily navigate the space safely? Ideally, passageways should be at least 36 inches wide. What about someone who might not be able to see the space to navigate it? If you're changing around the layout of furniture, especially on a week-to-week or class-to-class basis, that's going to be a more difficult scenario for someone who maybe memorizes the space in order to navigate it. And also think about lighting. What type of lighting is there? Is it too bright or too dim? Quite often, the fluorescent lights that we function under in classroom or office spaces give people with sensory processing issues difficulty. So sometimes having only one bank of lights on, or if you're able to dim them, that is a really good way to help a student who struggles with that type of scenario. The other thing to think about, and this is a big one, are instructional materials. Are course readings accessible? It's really a good practice to provide them in both hard copy and electronically. And a great way to do that is through whatever learning management system your school is using. A quick test for electronic versions to see if they might be accessible or not is to see if you can highlight each individual word or line of text. If you can, it is most likely somewhat accessible or mostly accessible. If you see here in the picture, I have part of a line highlighted. This is an example of a PDF that is accessible. If you have a document that's been scanned from a printed version and you go to highlight it and you only get the big blue block highlight where you can't highlight individual lines or words, that's a document that's not going to be accessible. This is important to keep in mind because students with print disabilities, which are students who are blind or have low vision or maybe have a learning disability that makes interpreting text more difficult, like dyslexia, they may be using assistive technologies in order to keep up with the reading materials that they are using. Another thing to keep in mind are what colors and fonts you're using on materials that you're creating. It's important to have high contrast. For instance, a dark background with white text or white background with dark text. You can see in the example of my own slides that I'm using here that I'm using a dark blue with white text. It's a high contrast view. The other important thing is what type of font you're using. Sans serif fonts like Calibri, Arial, and Century Gothic are sans serif fonts, and they are easier to distinguish to people with print disabilities. A sans serif font is fonts that do not have the extra little feet at the top or the bottom. So if you look at Times New Roman, you'll see that they have the little pieces that curve up on the base and top ends of the letter. Those make it more difficult for people to distinguish where one letter ends and another begins if they have low vision or a learning disability that's print-based. Another important thing to keep in mind is the use of appropriate line spacing. 1 1/4 to double spacing is ideal. This allows people who have tracking issues to not get lines of text mixed up. When choosing textbooks, ask the publisher if they provide access to accessible copies for students with disabilities. Typically, publishers will provide PDF copies to college disability offices if they can verify that a student has purchased a copy of the text. But it is important to ask if an accessible copy is available if needed, because sometimes they are not. And if they're not, then you're stuck using a textbook that a student doesn't have access to. You can also ask software companies for any programs or tools that you want to use for a voluntary product accessibility template, or a VPAT. VPATs are ways that companies can show us how they've made their product or software accessible. Also consider the handouts and notes that you may use. If you can provide outlines ahead of time, electronically is always better. This allows students to preview what will be discussed in class. It also allows students who have processing problems or attentional issues to take more effective notes during class periods. Also, any type of pictures, graphs, and figures will need alt tags added. Alt tags tags are done through the formatting process, and if you can see here, I have shown you a little bit of what it looks like. This is a picture of a cat that I had for 18 years growing up. His name is Tucket. And what I did when I inserted this picture is I right-clicked, and on the menu that popped up at the bottom, it says Format Picture. The third tab on that is that little square box, and in it pops up another menu underneath, and it says Alt Tag or Alt Text. I can enter in a title and a description of what the photo is. What's important about this is if you have a student who has low vision or who is blind and uses some type of screen reading software to navigate documents, they're not going to see the image, but that screen reading software will pick up and read them the alt tag if there is an alt tag there. So they're still getting the meaningful information from that graph, picture, or figure that they need instructionally because the alt tag has a description that gives them that information. Another important thing when you're selecting maybe video material is looking at captions. If you're making your own video, it's making sure that you're adding the captions you need, and there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. First and foremost, if you have a transcript, you can actually upload that to YouTube and it will sync with your video and you'll be able to have accurate captions. There's also a type of playback feature, and I'll include a link to this video that actually I have screen captured here that walks you through the process of how do you sync captions by listening back to the video and typing them in so that you have accurate captions. Please, please be wary of the automatic captions that are added on YouTube. They are highly inaccurate, which makes it very difficult. If you are a student who's hard of hearing or deaf and you are relying on captions to get the information that students are getting auditorily from a video, they'll be missing out on a big chunk of information. So if they have to write a reflection or take a quiz or write a paper based on information that they should have received through the video, they're missing a good chunk of instruction. So always watch the video and turn the captions on if you are looking at different video sources. I just want to take a moment to touch on attitude and social expectations. There are a number of ways that we can model inclusive behaviors without making an obvious statement. First and foremost, we can be aware of the language that we're using. Are we using language that's person first? For example, a student is never a dyslexic student. Instead, they are a student who happens to have dyslexia. Or a student has a physical disability but is not handicapped or disabled. The point is just to focus on the person and not the disability, because despite having a disability, that person has many abilities as well. The other thing that we can do is add accessibility statements into course syllabi. This lets students know that you're willing to work with them in your disability office to make any appropriate accommodations. Clearly and simply stating that you're willing to work with students helps alleviate a lot of the fear and anxiety about being othered in a classroom space. Think back to your role as student from the beginning of this presentation. You were met with challenge and frustration when simply trying to access readings for homework. So now, instead of being met with that challenge and frustration of inaccessible content, you can access your materials that are available to you accessibly without needing to take any additional steps. You have the ability to focus on your role as a student and not the otherness of being a student that happens to have a disability. I'm going to borrow a little wisdom from Voltaire here. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Remember, working towards making things as universally accessible as possible is always better than having reduced access. We may not get it 100% right. Actually, we may never get it 100% right for every person we may encounter. But we cannot let our lack of perfection stop us from doing good. So if you want to learn more, there are going to be some additional resources that are linked for you that you'll be provided. You can also go to YouTube or to the World Wide Web and search videos for step-by-step instructions on how to create captions, accessible documents, and more. There are a lot of great materials out there that are free to you and really give you step-by-step clear instructions on how to do things that seem more complicated. But once you learn them, they're truly not hard at all. Thank you for sticking with me through to the end. At this point, the video portion of this presentation is over, and I'll be joining you in real time to answer any questions you may have.